Mr. Patrick, welcome to the show. It's great to see you again.
It's a delight to be with you. Great to have you back on the airwaves.
And the happiest of birthdays as well. Thank you for sacrificing your free time.
Someone, I literally said, someone said, what do you want for your birthday? I said, I want to see Ben. I want to go on his podcast. That's what I want. None of these material things. I want a conversation with Ben.
I just saw a pig fly past my window. But Mr. Patrick, you once said, we are born out of a need for stress, and this is how we grow. How is this so?
Without stress, what's it feel like? You know, if you woke up today, Ben, and no one cared where you were, no one asked anything of you, you had nothing to do, nothing to achieve, no task to complete, nothing that demanded some extension of the capacity of all the facets you have. Your brain power, your muscular power, your endurance power. If nothing puts strain on that system, then what is that existence? You know, and it's really easy when people are feeling pressurized to think, oh my God, stress is negative. But fundamentally, pressure and load is the fundamental, fuel for human existence. We need some pressure. Without pressure, we drift into apathy. We know without pressure, it's a poor state of psychological well-being. It's a poor state of physical well-being. Those who are asked nothing of deliver very little. And those who are asked to extend themselves beyond what they thought was possible, grow, develop, and achieve. And I think, we're all in this strange sweet spot between, we definitely don't want no pressure, no stress. But of course, the real risk is we overwhelm ourselves with just that bit too much. So we're on a lifelong sort of seesaw of trying to get those two parts of the equation right. But the absence of pressure is dysfunction, and that's as straightforward as that.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of like when you're really, really hot and you don't know what it's like to be cold again. And when you're really, really cold, you don't know what it's like to be hot, because you find yourself in those positions where you are really stressed and you think, what can I do to get rid of it? And then sometimes you find yourself in positions of being absolutely content, and then you think, oh, I'm not doing enough. So I think it's a tricky balance to try and find where that is. I mean, even I was sitting yesterday just planning some of the podcast out, and I was a little bit stressed and had some work things on, and I was thinking, am I being productive enough? Then I was stressed about underperforming, and then an hour later I did a big chunk of work, and that kind of negative feeling just went away. But I feel like every time I've lent into it, I've prevailed. So there's a, I guess, would you say stress is almost like an invisibility key that helps us unlock and push our capacity for what we're actually capable of?
I think I'd say it's exactly that. I think there's lots in what you've just discussed. I mean, I think, when we feel overwhelmed, and really the traditional sort of westernized definition of stress is slightly incorrect. It's when pressures or stresses overwhelm our ability to cope, that stress goes from being positive to negative. So the big hinging point in everyone's relationship with stress is not necessarily how much stress there is how much coping capability I've got to deal with it. So that's an important piece. But you'll know this, Ben, when you've been in the heat of the battle and you've gone, oh my God, I've got too many things to do. I've said yes to too many projects. I'm, got all my internal questions about myself. I've got all the external demands of the world. I just want this to stop. Then imagine you do stop for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. By week, by sort of 15 days in, you're chomping at the bit. You can't down tools. The absence of pressure is not joy. That's not what we're aiming for. But there are those pockets where we've just got too many pressures for our current ability to cope. And that ability to cope, I've mentioned before, is multifactorial, right? So your ability to cope is partly about how you prioritize all those tasks you've got to do. It's partly about how you share the strains of those things. You're such a strong advocate for male mental health in particular. The biggest thing we can do is just talk to someone. Doesn't have to be a counselor, just a mate to go, do you know what, I'm struggling a little bit. And in saying that, we reduce our chance of negative consequences by a huge percentage. So I've got my ability to delegate, to process. I've got my ability to share and offload. And then again, another area, we've got our ability to physically buffer it. As in, I'm going to go for a zone 2 run, or I'm going to go and swim in the sea, or I'm going to do a cold plunge, or I'm going to do some breathing, do some meditating. This is our sort of coping layers, how I process the world, how I share the world, and how I look after my body to fight back against the world. And I think one of the great dangers is we're all at risk of being overwhelmed, but that doesn't mean we need to go and live in, the Nordic fjords and escape society. What it means is we need to lean into the techniques we can adopt to increase our ability to cope rather than ask the world to be less busy. And coming back to your point again there's that sort of interesting challenge. So many things you mentioned, Ben, are not real, right? As in, when all those things you were getting ready for yesterday, they are all perceptions of future events. Right, so you're saying I've got to get ready for this podcast. If I don't do that, if I'm not ready for Ollie Patrick, he's gonna shut me down. He's gonna, then that's going to be an awkward conversation, and this is going to be awful. And suddenly, in that moment, you can't think of the perfect question. Your physiology's gone to the worst place scenario, which is you and I having an imaginary argument, and I'm going, Ben, you've ruined my birthday. Thanks, mate. All these things. So but what happens is your body can't distinguish from this imagined future from its current state. So your body goes, well, I'll pump a bit of glucose in, I'll pump a bit of adrenaline in, I'll raise your temperature a bit. And it gives you that nagging, that aching feeling in your tummy, and that sort of shoulders rise up a bit. And then that sends a message to your brain to goes, actually, you're still in, and you haven't even done that yet, and you haven't done this yet. And you start overthinking. And we have this really interesting interface between the way we think and the way our body reacts, becoming a sort of a never-ending cycle. But none of the things that started that process are real, because this conversation was always going to go well, and you were always going to be fine, and you're always going to be, and what we see often is the anticipation of the events is far worse than the actual events themselves. So, if I think of my kids playing football, they both get nervous before kickoff, but as soon as football kicks off, they're both cooking, and I'm like, well, your imagined version of the game is far worse than the game itself, and that's the reality of our existence. Most people are living in the imagined version of their existence, which is far worse because you can't control anything. But the actual version is much, much easier to reconcile. So in the world of stress, we certainly don't want too little, but most of the pressures and stresses people face are completely manufactured from future events that simply aren't going to happen. And that's why we see great adoption of techniques like mindfulness, like single task management, like coming in, anything that brings you into the present will immediately stop you from running away with 1,000 futures that were never going to happen. And remember, where your thoughts go, your physiology follows, and that chain is where most people are struggling, I think.
You made a lot of very good points there. Even, I suppose, selfishly for me, these questions are things that surround my thought processes quite often, and I think definitely it's one of the places that we all spend a lot of time is with our heads in the future. And it's one of the places that is completely unreadable and unidentifiable, because nobody actually knows or has any clue about what is going to happen in the future, no matter how much we think we can look into these things. So I couldn't agree more. But I think one of the things that even I did with stress is obviously everybody kind of thinks, I want that life where I'm sitting on the beach with the espresso martini and the cigar and just chilling out for the rest of my life. And then you get there and you're thinking about the work or what you could be doing or how you could be productive. So it's a difficult sometimes line to tread, and it's something that I tend to struggle with sometimes. But even we were speaking about before in terms of your ability to cope with the stress, one of the things I actually found about 6 months ago and I was a little bit worried about was that I'd been through a period of really high stress. And what I noticed, which correlation with that, is that as a human being, I'd self-developed a lot and I'd progressed a lot. And I was like, am I starting to be addicted to the stress and the pain because I know I get this and then I know the outcome is this?
Yeah.
And that was the thing that kind of worried me a little bit. I wasn't too sure of how to really deal with that or balance that out.
That's a tough one, and that will play, as a physiologist, we start to move into pure psychology with that one. So I'm going to be careful of my scope of practice. But, there is a huge benefit to these periods of excessive stress, right? In the first instance, this is a hyper-adrenalized state. This is a high energy state. We hear about hormones that you do see at higher levels over time in these prolonged states, like cortisol. Cortisol is, an incredibly important steroid hormone. It increases glucose metabolism. It gets you ready for the fight. Adrenaline levels are high, glucose levels are high. You can feel good in these scenarios. The real consequence is when you run on those hormones and false energy for weeks, months, years, and then that resource runs out. So we've always got one eye on this concept of burnout as the sort of horizon scan. But that, again, lots of people can go quite deep into the well before that happens. But, the feeling of being just over the edge is one of potential addiction, and as you proved yourself you can do those things, you are building that muscle of grit. Grit is an extraordinary sort of psychological asset, and grit is our ability to persevere for a long-term goal, right? And perseverance is a really important skill. What we find, and there's a brilliant book, you might have read it, called Grit by a psychologist, Angela Duckworth, and she creates a grit score. It's basically, how tough am I? Not how mean am I? Not will I win a bar fight, but how able am I to endure hard things? And on that grit scale, which is quite fun, you can download it on the web and do it and get your score. If you have a higher grit score, you will see less stress everywhere. It's a really interesting concept, right? So people with a higher grit score, so those people who have endured. Let's take someone who, again, a refugee who has transected lands, without stable food, lost family members, has arrived somewhere. They have built a whole series of skills that when someone goes, "Oh, your bus is late," they'll be like, "I think I'll be all right." Because, I sort of remember crossing a country on a piece of bread. And so this bus being 20 minutes late isn't such a big thing. Whereas someone who hasn't built any grit will find that same event overwhelms their ability to cope, and they cascade into a sequence of behaviors and physiology. Now that's an extreme example. We don't all have to, mimic the lives of refugees, but you've, through going through some serious overwhelming stress, will have built grit as a muscle. That means then the same things that used to overwhelm you don't anymore. And that means you can lean into even bigger challenges. And there's a risk to that you start going bigger and bigger and bigger. And suddenly, there's a false confidence that finally catches you out. But two parts to that. Yes, pressure and stress and living on the edge is addictive because it comes with a whole multitude of positive hormones and energy that people thrive on. Secondly, the experience of going through those hard times builds a muscle that makes the rest of your life easier by comparison. And that is a fantastic advocate for why we should all try and do hard things. But thirdly, every body still needs rest and recovery. And the danger is that we lean into those first two traits without really understanding that third. And keeping one eye on whether our battery is truly depleted is a fundamental part of getting this right long term. And 3-4 weeks on a beach smoking cigars, you're chomping at the bit to get back at it. But 2 weeks every quarter feels about right. And that, you often look at things that we've built, these sort of quarterly idea of breaks. We need these decompression valves periodically, but we don't want all of our decompression in one fell swoop. You don't want 5 weeks off and then 47 weeks on. That doesn't work. Humans need these sort of interspaced recovery breaks. And so often in my old clinical practice, we'd find people who are getting ill just because they forgot the need for periodic holidays. And as simple as that is, a change of pace, change of stimulus. Lots of different bits, but I think, within there, it's still that same theme. Those are good traits, but rest and recovery will always be needed. It's just needed in a slightly different dosage pattern.
Just on that then, slightly with a tangent, is there what's the physiological reasons of why sometimes when people do that, for example, these individuals who hadn't taken a break for a while, they go on the break, they go on the holiday, and straight away sometimes they get ill or they get fluey or cold symptoms?
Yeah. So it'd be the fact that they've got this high cortisol level, which they've been running on, and that has been sort of the engine room of them creating almost a false energy. They're sort of running on this, they're running on fumes, but they're running on hormones. They're running on, a physiology that's got them in the heat of the battle. And then when their body comes out of that state and those hormones drop and the body goes to sort of, trying to rest and repair, its immune system drops. Now, some of that feels counterintuitive, but what's interesting about cortisol is it actually drives the immune system that would be most prone to picking up infections. So it changes the structure of your immune system. So if my body has got high cortisol levels, it thinks I'm in some kind of battlefield. So it's getting ready for an arrowhead to penetrate my skin, and then it'll have my immune system ready to take out the particular infection. So it's quite good, interestingly, at infections and that type of thing. But what it does is it removes a certain type of white blood cell that was responsible for mopping up things like early cancer cells. Because it goes, look, I'm not too worried about Ollie's 50-year health landscape because I've got to make sure I'm ready for an arrowhead. And it's called Th2 shift. We shift an immune system capability. But then when that cortisol drops, that immune system drops also. And so what you've got is just a natural shift back of your immune system in response to it no longer waiting for an arrowhead. And that capability then is vulnerable to the little brat sat next to you breathes, some virus onto you. And, and it's probably the only time when you've been absolutely in the coals, when you've been at it. Listen, I love all children, but there can be kids that just shouldn't be coughing in your face. Yeah. And you're like, I've been slogging myself for a 4-month project. I've got it all over the line. I'm heading off on my holiday, and some kids just heaving like bacteria and virus over you. That is the time to wear a mask. And as much as that sounds absolutely, people don't want to be wearing a mask on an airplane. If you've been in the fires of stress and you finally got your break, then you cannot be receiving an airborne virus. That is when you're vulnerable, and you've got to be careful. I mean, I had a trip to Vegas planned with some friends years ago, just before kids. You won't be surprised to hear. And I'd been working on a big work project that finished a couple of days before. And then I basically put myself in like an ISO chamber. I was like, no one can come near me because my immune system is low. I was, hoondogging vitamin C. I was, antioxidants. I was going crazy on my immune boosters, and we've got to be careful with that. Things that support my immune system, nothing boosts your immune system per se. And then my brother-in-law was coming over, and he wanted to pick something up, and he said, I've got a slight sniffle. And I got my wife to meet him down the road. I was like, don't bring a single drop of that virus in, because I'll get ill. And I'm probably only going to Vegas once, and as it turned out,
I was imagining like the scene of E.T. with the big plastic tunnels down the street in the city.
It's exactly that. It's the E.T. ISO chamber, and it's like, because cortisol got you ready to be able to defend an arrowhead, and when it drops, that arrowhead hits you. And it's the worst possible time. So, within that, there are two parts. There is really rebuilding energy quickly, and that's about sleep, rest, recovery, self-care, kindness, and nourishment. Hydration, antioxidants, vitamin C, vitamin D. Having the sort of the big nutrients of your core vegetable and fruit intake as in surplus. Zinc, vitamin C. Those would be sort of the two main elements that you'd go, I'm really going to lean into those from a nutritional point of view. And don't bounce into brats or brother-in-laws. Yeah.
I'm guessing if you go into Vegas as well, it's probably a good point to kind of clear the tank out, ready for the chemicals, the alcohol, and depending how inclined you are to the pharmaceutical for some people as well. So I guess that's a great way to reset, ready for what Vegas has in store.
Clear the pipes, and of course, then you sacrifice. You've sacrificed your immune system thereafter. And to be clear, I was on margaritas and Monster. Those were my two. Those are my two drugs of choice, which was a terrible concoction. But you come back, and of course, then you get ill again for a different reason. That you've just lost all of your natural energy restoration techniques, mostly sleep. If most of my immune system is regulated through sleep and my gut. Me, eating McDonald's for 3 days on a diet of Monster and cocktails. I've got no sleep. I've got no gut health. So in the same way as getting out of the stress ready for the trip is a risk, when you come back from the trip, you will be vulnerable again. And your biggest weapon there is to not be exposed to airborne pathogens and bits and bobs. So incubate while you restore.
Just on that, is there a reason why, or is this just maybe a feeling of, with hangovers and after drinking, why as we age it takes such a lot longer to recover, or why it has such a big impact on us as we age?
Yeah, I mean, certainly dehydration still seems to be the main mechanism of discomfort. There's sort of clearance of toxicity from the liver. Ultimately, as we age, we're just a reduced biological version of ourselves, and I say that on my birthday with sorrow in my heart, sorrow in my heart. There are fundamental changes. We have less stem cells, we have less hormones. You'll hear a lot in the fitness and wellbeing world about the molecule NAD. NAD is a sort of coenzyme within all the cells of our body, effectively that drives the energy production process. And, we've got half the NAD levels in our cells at 20 that we had at birth, and then half again at 40. So every 20 years, the molecule of energy is halving. And this correlates quite closely with stages of life and builds into that narrative that we were built to have a chance to meet someone, mate, create, an offspring, further our gene pool, and then sort of wither off into the night. And everything that we do sort of after the age of 25, 26 is sort of relatively irrelevant from an evolutionary point of view. So when we look at everything getting harder in this mid stage, it's because we're sort of running out of the fumes of youth. And you can look at that from an athletic performance, which you're close to, and say, look, there's in explosive sport, certainly, but in top sport, you won't get many great athletes. You get the odd one over 35, but they'll have looked after themselves from 23, 24, that you can't.
Your Ronaldos and people like that.
Your Ronaldos. But, Ronaldo's an outlier. Everyone goes, Ronaldo can still do it at 39. Well, can he at the level he was? He's certainly not the player he was 3 years ago. He's still better than everyone around him. Doesn't mean he's as good as he was. But that outside of goalkeepers, there's not many sports where you see your best athletes. Even with Djokovic, you've got an unbelievable athlete, who's probably number 3 in the world, but can't get back to where he was because age won't allow him to do so. And those same biological mechanisms that drive elite tennis, elite football are the same biological mechanisms behind your white blood cell production and your immune, your inflammatory markers. And we just run out of gas. And we're looking at ways in which we can buffer and reverse that. And that's why the longevity marketplace has emerged as the fastest growing subdivision of wellness. And what people are really talking about with longevity is not living longer. It's saying that between the ages of 36 and 47, according to this sort of recent Finnish study, we sort of age aggressively. That's when we sort of the wheels come off. And what is it biologically that's happening in that window? And then how can we intervene with each of those biological processes? In the first instance, through clever drugs, which is what they're trying to create.
Do you think there's the way to create a perfect dose for a week of stress for the average person? If there is, what would it kind of look like in terms of a week of training and lifestyle of people wanting to try and implement tools that are going to balance their week to week out?
I think, your body can do a week of stress, it can do a month of stress, it can do a year of stress. People who've had a young kid will go, what the hell? I know someone who've had 4 kids, 18 months apart. You're like, that's 8 years of having toddlers. So we were designed for famine, we're designed for war, we're designed to raise children, we're designed to lose jobs. That we've got to just also be careful we don't take the first signs and symptoms of stress as distress. That's an important piece, right? And there's an uncomfortability to that sentence in the fact that we are designed at times to not feel amazing. Emotional health isn't about feeling happy all the time. It's about being able to connect with all your emotions, of which one might be grief, one might be sorrow, one might be sadness. They aren't things that we must avoid at all costs. We don't want to be perpetually stuck in any of them, nor perpetually stuck in joyfulness. Then you become quite an annoying person, probably. The reality is stress is something that we're designed to do for prolonged periods of time. That's not of key consequence. I would say if someone has got, I've got a really intense week coming up, let's imagine, then what you don't want to do is have your immune system become the limiting factor in your performance. I don't want to get cold. I don't want to get run down. I need to keep going. And therefore, your biggest single entity there is I need to get the best quality sleep I can within the allocated time available. And that would be down in the first instance to mitigation of mid-afternoon caffeine and no alcohol. And of course, when people are super revved up, they generally lean into a beer to celebrate or a glass of wine and alcohol. It's changed societally, but it's still deeply associated with stress relief. It's a stress exacerbator. And its biggest role in killing my relationship with stress is that it slaughters sleep architecture, and in doing so means that for the same 6 hours I squeezed in, I get very little deep sleep, very little REM sleep. So with that in mind, a big week would say, okay, let's imagine I'm working 17-hour days and I'm going to blast that through for 2 weeks. Then I'm definitely not doing mid-afternoon caffeine unless I absolutely have to. I'm definitely, again, going to not have any alcohol. And I need micro pockets of breaks within there. So when I do go to sleep, I'm not doing all my dreaming, all my memory filing in the same window. And then it's about going this is not a time for additional load, right? This idea that I would then do high intensity exercise, that I wouldn't either do stretching, Pilates, yoga, or probably, zone 2 cardio or even zone 1. All I want is movement. All I want is some sense of connection with nature. So if I went for 2 15-minute walks, feet on the grass over the course of that day went to bed without caffeine and alcohol in my system, I'll have a much better chance of getting through than if I did a high intensity training session with a beer to celebrate and I was running on coffee to keep my mind sharp. And that's where you probably got to lean into other forms of nootropics. If your mid-afternoon fatigue requires you to be switched on, then looking at, again, not caffeine-free nootropic options would be a point of interest in that scenario. But it's got to be about concentrated pockets of downtime. And I would probably, as a single tool, Ben, and encourage that person to do a proper power nap or non-sleep deep rest. So 20 minutes of deep, that stage between sleep and wakefulness. So set an alarm for 21 minutes, lying comfortably with your clothes on in a sort of supported back chair, and just saying, in that 20 minutes of stillness, I might get the physiological benefit of anything up to 8 hours of sleep, but it's got to be totally free from stimulus. And so you've got to use a clever toolkit. If you're going to do 17 hours for 2 weeks, hammering yourself, you can do it, but your immune system's going to be likely the most limiting factor. And for that, you've got to be clever and sharp and use pockets of time wisely.
Is there anything that you do around sleep, or is there anything that you do for your own sleep or people that you work with to try and, optimize it? I was speaking about this on the podcast that I did last week. And whenever I switch from, the UK to Australia or vice versa, it takes me a good 2 weeks to get back into a good place. And I almost feel like I stress sleep just because my body kind of doesn't know where it's at in terms of circadian rhythm and the time frame. But the one thing that I've actually been doing over the past 3 to 4 weeks now, and I thought was a bit of wishy-washy bullshit when I first started doing it, is I started one wearing a nose strip and then 2 wearing the mouth tape. So I'm just nasal breathing all night. And I noticed that like my deep sleep was a lot better and I was waking up a lot less. I don't know if it's got anything to do with it, but my resting heart rate has also gone down on average. And then when I wake up, I'd feel like I can just fight a bull. I feel like I've slept well. I don't feel stressed when I've woken up. I think because for me as well, though, I sleep like Darth Vader. So it's quite easy to wake myself up in the night as a bit of a snorer. So that's been super, super helpful. But I'm just wondering from your experience, what kind of things you offer to people as things that they can optimize their sleep?
Yeah, it's sort of the key thing to sleep is probably to start backwards from the thing that person does that hinders sleep. So the great danger is going, it's always magnesium. If someone's got good magnesium in their diet, then adding a magnesium biglycinate or threonate in the evening isn't going to make them sleep better because it wasn't the limiting factor. If you say, it's first morning light, but that person's a dog walker and they always get up and they always go for a walk first thing in the morning, it's not going to be that. So the challenge with sleep is you get a soundbite on a podcast and someone goes, I'll try that, but if it isn't your limiting factor, it isn't your solution. Nose taping, or nose strips and mouth taping can be a point of interest, and I'll come back to that in a minute. I think your foundations of sleep, you've mentioned the word circadian rhythm, come from the hormones that drive your 24-hour clock run in cycle with light and dark. So consistency, let's forget the transatlantic or what do you describe when someone travels to Australia? It's not transatlantic. What do you say?
I don't even know what.
Transworld?
Maybe, yeah.
You're the other side of the world.
Mm-hmm.
So that needs a whole separate thing because that's about gradually recalibrating digestive patterns, bringing melatonin, production earlier with using precursors. There's a whole load of protocol stuff that can be thought about for that. But for the average person, the fulcrum being consistent wake time, which means my body knows that 3 hours before I always wake up at 6:30, it'll start making cortisol. But if 6:30 a.m. is sometimes 8:30, sometimes 9, sometimes 5:30, my body's like, when the bloody hell am I supposed to make cortisol? Because I want to make it 3 hours before, 2.5 hours before Ollie wakes up. So when he gets up, he's full of this hormone that revs him up, but I don't know when it is. So that inconsistency of wake time is a problem. Some degree of flexibility, but over sleep time, but consistency there seems to be of equal value to sleep duration because of the role they have in stabilizing your morning hormone cortisol and your evening hormone melatonin. Then we need light in that morning portion and darkness and cool in the evening portion. So before I'm doing potions and lotions, I'm saying don't come to me with a sleep disorder if you've got no ratchet to your wake time, no morning light in the first hour, and you're going to bed at inconsistent times in the presence of blue light, stimulus, work, other. So I need a distilled physiology in the evening that's meant you've built your version or sleep hygiene, which is a series of actions and behaviors that have told your body there's no problem to solve before this system wakes up in the morning. If you go to bed with the last thing you see being 24-hour news and an email from someone and a social media clip from your closest rival, what do you think is going to happen?
Mm-hmm.
Your brain is going to try and solve those problems during the night, either through wakefulness or through reduced quality of sleep. So ratcheted morning, ratcheted as in like locked in, within half an hour ideally, so 1 hour's bandwidth, morning and evening, good exposure to natural light first hour of the day, and then darkness and cool in the evening. So cool means I didn't train too late. Cool means I didn't eat too late. Cool means I didn't get myself revved up watching a serial killer movie too late. I'm doing things that tell my physiology I'm going to go upstairs in a minute to a dark room, which has got nothing in it but my bed. And in that room, there's no problems I need to solve. There's nothing I need to think about. I've written them all down in my journal, or I've written my to-do list for the next day. I've cleared the noise spinning around here. I've put it all there. And now all I'm going to do is let my body go through some lovely sleep architecture, wake up at the same time, and I'll be ready to rock and roll. Outside of that, caffeine and alcohol, two biggest, ingestible destabilizers of sleep. And in most cases, we see the addition of magnesium in one of those forms, threonate or biglycinate or glycinate, having a role on the neurotransmitter that helps with sleep, GABA, and physiologically calming my musculoskeletal system. So there's merit to that. And again, there's everything from have I got stable blood glucose to did I at some point in the day take breaks so I could file the memories that are building up through the course of the day. There's tons, but if you're not doing those big ratchet sleep and wake, light and dark, caffeine and alcohol, don't go to the quirky stuff until you've got that right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. I mean, that was interesting what you said in terms of if there's actual specific issues with sleep, and then these things are good for addressing them. Obviously, for me, in terms of being a big snorer, the thing for that, what I'm guessing will happen for me is that with the mouth tape, it would have immediately stopped that because I was just nasal breathing. That's sorted a lot of problems out.
Could be, and I should probably have answered the question you actually asked me, Ben, but which was, this is the nasal tape. So
that was more specific to me. I think the audience will take a lot away from the suggestions that you've made. Is that they're not all they'll
be like big Darth Vader.
Yeah,
does he even listen? So mouth taping. The question you've got with mouth taping is it's almost n equals 1, right? So what the idea is, we should be breathing through our nose. And breathing through our nose is also deeply interlinked with a sense of physiological calm. So we would say the nose is built for breathing, the mouth is built for eating, right? So if you think of the structure of the nose, it's got these cilia, these hair in it that clears and filters the air going in. It's got a much greater ability to release nitric oxide, which is this element we produce as we breathe oxygen that dilates our blood vessels. So nasal breathing is directly associated with better oxygenation and physiological calm, right? So when I'm worried about stuff, I breathe through the mouth. When I'm chilled about stuff, it's in and out through the nose. So the nose is both a reflection of my state, but could also be a dictator of my state. So this is why breath work has rightly risen to a sort of prominent well-being and health modality, because I can influence my state of physiological stress or calm through changing my place and pattern of breathing. So if I go from breathing orally, where as I breathe in, it's more upper respiratory or more chesty. If I do that for a minute or so, I'll be like, what am I worried about?
Yeah.
And I'll be like, oh my God, I forgot. I'll create a worry. If you go, right, Ollie, let's change the narrative. Let's have a couple of minutes in through the nose, out through the nose, hand on your tummy. I'll be like, yeah, that thing doesn't matter. That thing doesn't matter. So the same life is happening to both those people. So the state of breathing changes my awareness of my state. And, we can see everything from extended exhalation. So as I breathe out, my body becomes physiologically calm. As I breathe in, I get a bit more alert. So if I breathe out longer than I breathe in, we see people naturally becoming calm, even if they're on a plane that's crashing or they're on in a meeting that's gone horribly wrong. And the old adage is if I feel physiologically calm, then I cannot feel stressed. Now, the caveat to this is, so you might, by mouth taping, have driven more nasal breathing, which is great, better oxygenation and a greater sense of calm. And that calm has allowed you to see more time in deep sleep, wake up feeling more refreshed. If you are someone who's got a slightly deviated septum, so, I've broken my nose 3 times, my nose is a little, if I breathe in, one side goes over. So if you take my mouth, potentially I won't breathe enough oxygen through my nose, and I will run the risk of deoxygenating during the night. And we have this condition called sleep apnea, which they think there's maybe 10 million people in the UK. So I think there's 70 odd million people, or was that 40 million adults. This is a high percentage of people who've got some form of sleep apnea, where we don't breathe properly during the night, don't get enough oxygen in the tissues, and my body gasps to make sure I get more oxygen in. But in that gasp, I come out of deep sleep without noticing it. So I never get into proper deep sleep. So you've got someone sleeping 8 hours and they wake up shattered. And it's because they're this condition, sleep apnea, or sleep apnea, it's sometimes called. Fundamentally, you've got that person going, I can't understand why I'm so tired when I had sufficient opportunity for sleep. Now, if you mouth tape that person, you will worsen that problem. And that's why your beauty there has been you're tracking 2 things. 1, how you feel, which is you feel better, and 2, your data. And I always put it in that order, right? So you're noticing metrics of sleep are improving in terms of volume of deep sleep, volume of REM, hopefully quality of rest and recovery, but you feel a benefit. So then the nasal strip and the mouth tape for you is a great intervention. That's as good a science as we're going to get. Someone listening to this going, I don't sleep well, because they wake up at different times, go to bed on booze and alcohol, don't go to bed reading their phone in bed, taping their mouth and eliciting more sleep apnea could compound them to an issue that actually becomes a real problem. And so I would say end up where you're at, but don't start where you're at.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of like the anabolic steroid for the teenage boy who hasn't sorted his diet and is training out. Yeah,
exactly the same.
Yeah.
Exactly. Don't. Life's a pyramid. And the whole wellness industry is trying to tell you that the reason you've not achieved things is you haven't got the final block of the pyramid, and because no one's selling you the base, which is free stuff. And if I see someone coming in with another product up here before someone goes, I didn't know I had to do all this stuff, and why we're not taught what I'm talking to you about in school,
it's basics.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Basics, right? We're going to spend. If we have an average lifespan of a male, 80 years in the UK, I got 26 years of sleep. 26 years of my life, and no one taught me how to do it. So it's one of my bugbears, that. And products can help, right? So you've seen a great advantage from a product, but products on top of behavior, not products instead of behavior.
Yeah. I mean, it was interesting what you mentioned there as well. I've actually been doing, or was doing, and have been doing sort of just 5 minutes of breath work in the morning. That's what led me then to do the nose strip and the mouth, just from how good I felt from that in the morning. I guess it interests
really
me in terms of, the chicken and the egg debate of how much is how people feel driven by what their body is doing and how their body is working versus how those people's bodies are working and doing because of how people are feeling.
It's this, they are the same thing. And I think the minute we've separated feeling from physiology, we've forgotten there's no such thing as the mind and body. There's just the body, and the mind is an extension of the body. If you can take someone who is panicking that the plane is going to crash, and through changing their breathing for 3 minutes, they no longer believe that the plane is going to crash. We see this greatest example that our physiology dictates our thought processes. Now, there is a great merit to targeting physiology through, it's targeting physiology through both. I can change the way I think to change my physiology, and I can change my physiology to change the way I think. So I can change, let's use an example of that. I could do CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. Let's take a fear of flying, right? I at some point have built a pathway between an aeroplane and me believing it's going to crash. That's what I believe. And so when I get on a plane, my physiology goes to the plane crash, and I start breathing badly, my palms start sweating, and the whole thing is a predictive physiology. So I'm going to a plane crash when all I'm doing actually is sat next to someone who's reading a romance novel and getting ready for sex on the beach. The drink. The drink.
Preface that one.
Crucial. Yeah. It's a cocktail. So that's interesting. So what I could do with that person is go, right, what we will do is go to a CBT, and we will break the pathway between you thinking a plane is going to crash in your brain. We're going to reframe that neural connection, a negative automated thought. And we'll do that through education, through speaking things into truth, a whole range of evidence-based techniques. So I next get on the plane and my body doesn't react the same way. That's great. So nothing's changed apart from my perception of what's about to happen. Or I could get on the plane and do breath work and do meditation and bring my body out of a state of alertness into a state of calm, where I go, actually, because I'm so calm, maybe nothing bad is going to happen. And the great challenge here is it's not either of those approaches, it's both. Most of the stresses we create are manufactured from what we believe is going to happen next. That's the world we live in. If you believe something positive is going to happen, something negative is going to happen, that's where your physiology will get ready for. So I can change my belief system by changing the way I think, but I can also change the way I think by changing how I feel. So if I walk onto that plane having done CBT and breath work, then I'm the one getting ready for sex on the beach. And that's the control we have over this machine. These are malleable processes. They're adjustable, but it's not at one angle we target the body. We try and get it from a few different perspectives.
Yeah. I mean, even sometimes when you listen to someone, you hear someone speak a little bit of logic into our life when we're in a stressful period. Sometimes you go, oh yeah. And then your whole body kind of comes down. But one of the things for me has also been, I guess, which kind of ties into this, I've done a lot of manifestation this year in terms of just thinking about the future in a different way to how I usually think about, because I realized that my thoughts and my beliefs are different. So I can have these thoughts that come into my head sometimes and it tells me I'm a piece of shit or I've done something wrong. But my belief system is the core foundation of things I know in my heart and in my head are true. I think when I find that self-awareness, it makes me feel a lot different when I can differentiate thinking to beliefs. And that's what manifestation's been great for as well.
I'd love to hear that. And I think the science behind manifesting is really robust. I was on Roxy Nafusi's podcast not that long ago. She's sort of the queen of manifestation because she wrote the book Manifesting, I think, which was picked up by Hollywood and whatnot. And it pulls on some very adept neuroscience. In fact, Dr. Tara Swartz's first book really explains why manifesting is creating neurological patterns of if I build a path to a future event, then it's easier for my brain and my body to follow that path. So manifesting in its core, the structure of it around, improving our future version of ourselves, reestablishing our beliefs is a remarkably robust methodology. And I think if it's worked that well for you, Ben, then other people should probably lean into it. Mm-hmm. And the reality is we all have those thought process, of self-doubt, of self-criticism. Most people will be their harshest critic. And that's why speaking's so valuable, right? When you speak to someone and you go, I'm just thinking I'm a piece of shit. They're like, what are you talking about? And even if you say it, you're like, yeah, fair enough, actually. What am I, but in your mind, these things are true. When they're spoken, you see them as not true. So I think in that sense between beliefs and thoughts, etc., I still come back to the fact, if we just speak about how we're feeling a bit, and again, I praise you for creating spaces for men to do that in particular, and equally females, but men are more bottlenecked with their ability to do it, certainly. Then we have an amazing technique that falls somewhere between manifesting, these autonomic nervous system regulation techniques of breath work and meditation and CBT. And you might need none of those if you just have a proper catch up with someone and tell them how you're feeling. And as you speak it into life, you realize, actually, it's not true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. I mean, just kind of leaning back into stress, because I'm also wary of, people are a lot more stressed and anxious than ever. There's some stats that I pulled up here which would also back that up. And I'm just wondering, with technology and things that have happened over the past, I guess, 30 years, what the biggest levers may be for that. Because, Dana White famously said that, I tell young people now all the time, I definitely tell my kids, if you are even remotely fucking savage, you'll run these people over in the next generation. And, and he, as others have expressed, how it's never been easy to make something of yourself. And, I would maybe objectively agree, but there seems to be a huge uprise in mental health issues, conditions, anxiety, depression, suicide rates. With this in mind, what do you think is one of the big levers that's causing the stress, anxiety, and obviously the horrific end result in suicide rates being higher than ever as well?
Really tricky, and it's definitely not one thing.
Yeah,
it's sort of a sum of 1,000 things. If I pull some of the theory, each of these theories has got some pros and some fierce criticism, so I've got to be wary. But we think again back to grit and the ability to persevere. There's an argument that Gen Z, Gen Alpha, certainly in particular, haven't been instilled grit because we chose self-esteem over grit. So in the schooling system, this sort of best example through the participation medal, you weren't allowed to fail at anything because failure meant you weren't good enough, and not being good enough meant you were low in self-esteem. And actually the failure through the schooling system, the collapsing on the cross-country run, the not being able to do the maths test, doing things that you weren't good at is the muscle that needs to be built for when you first enter the world. And no one cares about your self-esteem. They just care about the task that they've assigned you to do. So there's a interesting question about the way individuals are being raised, and have we neglected grit as a fundamental psychological asset by not allowing people to encounter tough challenges and fail. That's block one. Block two, we have an unrelenting new type of stress that's best described as allostatic load. So stress in the old days might have been the big financial pressure to get out and pay a rent, or or bereavement, or for trying to find a date. Now we have this sort of multitude of new inputs from perpetual business cycles, 24-hour news, social media, from sort of unrelenting noise. And that unrelenting noise is both sort of the noise of the world, but actually also noise, unrelenting light, a 24-hour clock that tells you there's always somewhere else you could be, and there's always someone else having more fun than you. And this shift, which isn't just social media, it's also 24-hour news cycles, it's also a global economy, has just created more inputs into a person now than has ever existed before. And pressure isn't one big thing. Pressure is the sum of 1,000 things. And what we're seeing is individuals without huge coping mechanisms encountering all these pressures and stresses of the world, and it overwhelms them. Combine that with social isolation. So now we have the removal of our traditional social constructs, the church, the physical place of work, the school, and it's easier to be isolated than ever before. And we see loneliness rising with loneliness itself has the equivalent risk of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So we have a fractured social construct with a lack of psychological assets intertwined with a voluminous allostatic load. And we have access to groups that will compound those negative thoughts into, a sort of doom-mongering, suicide ideation groups, or people who are very keen to capture those groups and take them to the next level. Whereas, you wouldn't have found people encouraging you to take your own life or showing you how to do it, 50, 60 years ago. So we're creating opportunity in a way that was never there before. And all of this at a time when you're told this is the best time to be alive. And I genuinely think, Ben, this is the hardest time to be well ever. And, we aren't being taught the rules of the game. We're just cast out of a schooling system that was not preparing me for the world that I'm entering. And the world has changed generationally between, Gen X, me, millennials, and Gen Z. Each generation is shortening because the rules of the game are changing so rapidly. That doesn't create a single point solution either. This is a schooling problem. Mm-hmm. This is a noise problem. This is a coping problem. This is and we're seeing industries spawning out of this. And you're a big believer in run clubs and social well-being. This sort of idea of, I think we saw 200 plus run clubs in London last year. We're seeing social wellness clubs like Remedy Place, out in New York, and I think they've got another one in LA where we've got no alcohol, with saunas and cold, and people are going, why are these booming up? Because they're sort of the new pub, they're the new darts club, they're the new church. That we don't have a place where I bump into both people who are aligned with my values and also people who don't necessarily, and that's good as well. We've got these echo chambers that everyone I meet is in the same thing. I never meet a differing opinion. I could go my whole life without meeting someone who disagrees with me, other than online, but that's not healthy. So none of these are definitive, but this is a multitude of things that make it more likely for a young individual to feel overwhelmed, to feel lonely, to feel lost, to find people who intend to direct them down a path of doing themselves harm. And all of those things are new. And, we need to sort of nip them in the bud one by one, from my perspective.
Yeah. I mean, that was a beautiful answer. I was just in awe listening to the things that you'd explain. I mean, I spoke to a few of these with George from the Tin Men last week as well, who's he's great and looks into these topics a lot. And I think it's useful to have these explanations so that people feel like they can relate to other people as well. I think that's one of the big things that takes away a lot of that stress, and knowing that they're not the only one who's going through it. And I think, again, that's why there's such a need and an urge for these social interactions, is because they make us feel so much better when we speak to these people. And it's why I often leave some of the men's events that I run both in the UK and Australia, both elated, but also really saddened, just because of the stories that are shared and some of them and the things that people have been through and just dealt with on their own. So I mean, and one of those is we kind of spoke about just off air before the podcast is and I'm not saying this is your area of expertise unless you're looking into the future of becoming a love doctor, but one of the things that often comes up is either heartbreak or divorce, and obviously divorce rates are up at 50% at the moment, and men's suicide rates tend to be a lot higher post divorce. I guess everyone at some point in life is going to go through heartbreak. It's kind of a given, but I think one of the things that will interest a lot of people is with heartbreak, there's so many physiological changes, such as, heightened heart rate, physical pain, digestive issues, sometimes insomnia, appetite changes. What's actually happened to the body during heartbreak, and why does emotional pain show up like that physical pain?
Yeah, it's a very physical thing. And heartbreak has some extra nuances to other traumatic life events, in the sense of there seems to be a direct impact on the heart, which is fascinating. And not something I've looked into deeply, but I know in situations where people have been together for decades, people in their 70s and 80s, and when their partner dies, the other partner literally dies from heartbreak. It's sort of an anomalous cardiovascular event. It's not your traditional atherosclerotic plaque. It's not your traditional heart failure. Their heart stops. And there's something sort of, I almost, sometimes I don't look into things because I love the mystery and the narrative of it, and I don't want to dig into the science and find out maybe that's just total bullshit that I've told you. But I think there's definitely something in that space. I think there's a scale called the Holmes and Ray scale, which looks at life events that are most likely to make you physically unwell. Divorce is top 10. Loss of a partner, so bereavement of a partner, is number 1. Loss of a family member, number 2. It's basically that big life events will make you sick because they destroy almost every biological system that keeps you well. They remove your biggest outlet of social wellness, your confidant. Mm-hmm. They create a change in every rhythm and pattern of your life, from sleeping arrangements to living arrangements to nutritional arrangements. But I suppose on the main level, it's a physiological stress, pure and simple. For all the things, it's a grieving process and would match grief very closely. You're grieving a version of a future that you had anticipated that no longer exists, and it requires a really sort of intelligent set of self-talk, social structure, and for me, in most cases, therapy, because you've got to work out which bit of it is the most painful. Is it the loss of what you had? Is it the loss of a prospective future? Is it the loss of rhythm? Is it the sense that and of course these raise questions of, am I worthy? I say to my children, I would need them probably to get broken up with at some point in their early years to become what I hope is a really good partner later on down the line. And I worry about people who've never been broken up with, because the introspection from it is vital in the sense of, I didn't maybe look at my patterns of behavior, or I didn't realize that's how I came across, or most importantly, I'm not going to define my self-worth through someone else's definition of my worth. These are big, complex questions that ideally we build the muscle for that as well through our adolescent years, and we try and fail and get ready for that marriage. But these are all nice to haves. Mm-hmm. I think, Ben, it's at the end of the day, it is a traumatic life event, and with all trauma comes physiological stress, disturbance of patterns, loss of social wellness, and it with a bit like the male mental health suicide piece, it needs to be attacked from all those different angles of self-care, quality social structures, for me, quality therapy, and that multitude of things to say, this is a big thing, and no one just brushes the shoulders and gets up and walks off from it. And those who do won't be setting themselves up for what is important, which is what happens next.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, even when I went through, I noticed there was a lot of things within my Whoop and my Connect that were just, the data was completely off, and I might as well have ignored it for that period. But we've briefly touched on technology around how it's maybe sometimes negatively affecting the youth and the generation coming through. what do you think in terms of technology and how it governs our health and wellness journey and the impacts it has on that? And with that, I think it'd just be good for people who are using things like Whoop or Garmin's and connecting that kind of thing to run through some of the basic metrics and measurements and what they mean. Because I think a lot of people can look at those screens, and a lot of people do look at those screens and think, what the hell am I looking at? I don't know. I don't understand how to read it. So what are kind of the key markers that people should be looking at within their Whoop or with their Garmin? And what do some of those markers such as HRV and V02 Max, what do they mean for people's health?
Yeah, I'll do a whistle stop tour because this could be
I know.
This could be a 4-hour webinar. I think to me again, you used a really good word there, governed by, right? And you shouldn't be governed by your technology. Your technology should work for you. You don't work for your tech. I don't wake up in the morning and go, dear Whoop, dear 8 Sleep, how did I sleep? I go, do you know what? I feel pretty good today. I'll be interested to check whether that matches with the data. So I use the data to support me consolidate a behavior or change a behavior. That's what the data is doing for me. But my example of that, I started using Whoop back in, probably 6 years ago when it first came out, because I was busy at work. I was commuting into London, had young twins. And if I went for a certain number of runs a week, running was my outlet, I would get a chest infection. So there was a very close point to tipping into overtraining. So I needed Whoop to help me make a decision whether I should or shouldn't run. And if I should run, what the intensity of that run should look like. Because all of the pressure of my commute, the business that I was involved in running, the household, all what goes in the same pot. It's all physiological stress. It's all pressure. And at some point when I go for that run, that was the tipping point that pressure overwhelmed me and I got ill. So it's all very linear. So Whoop allowed me to make an informed decision on my training volume based on my life load. Easy way of putting it. And for that, I was looking at its marker of recovery. Now, that'll come back to in a minute. If someone is saying, I cannot work out when I have my last coffee, because some days I feel like I can't fall asleep, other days I do, or I can't work out whether I can get away with 1 glass of alcohol, 2 glasses of alcohol with quality sleep, or I need to train after work and I don't know how long I should finish my training session and go to sleep, then the sleep metric from a wearable is going to help you calibrate the dosage of the behavior to quality sleep. Right? That's what it's going to influence. It's going to consolidate or influence a behavioral change. That's what they do. No one ever got more well from wearing a wearable. They don't electrocute you into wellness. They allow informed choices around behaviors. So have you got a question over behaviors influencing sleep positively, negatively? Then there's a wearable for that. Have you got a question over whether the volume of pressures you're facing, including exercise, is overwhelming your body's ability to cope? Then that would be a recovery metric led by heart rate variability. Have you got a question whether the impact of the zone 2 runs mixed with Norwegian protocol 4x3s or by high intensity interval training is increasing your cardiorespiratory fitness as determined by a marker called V02 Max? Then you want a V02 Max. Are you trying to work out if you are basically a lazy old git and you're not moving at all outside of your 2 HYROX training sessions a week? Then you might need a modern day pedometer captured as an overall activity tracker to spur you into a 15-minute walk at lunch and a 20-minute walk at the end of the day. I mean, a bit facetious, but you basically got to start with the question, not with the tech. You got to go, which behavior am I interested in calibrating more closely to its desired outcome? Is it a movement behavior? Is it a sleep behavior? Is it stress behavior? That's the sort of theory. Now, wearables started to consolidate those into one unified dashboard. And what you've often got is people putting equal merit into the 3 scores from a Whoop, for example, when really they only came there for the 1. That not all things are equal if you're comfortable with how you're expressing. The metric that's most confusing that sits behind all this is heart rate variability. And heart rate variability sits behind Aura, Whoop, Garmin, other. And HRV itself is not that interesting. It's the variability of your heartbeat. So if my heart beats 60 times a minute, it doesn't beat once a second. That would be metronomic, like the old things we used to learning the piano. My heartbeat will vary beat to beat. And the more it varies, the more my heart is under the control of the nervous system that chills me out, called the parasympathetic. The less it varies, the more my heart is under the control of the nervous system that gets me ready for stress and alertness, called the sympathetic nervous system, in really simple layman's terms. So we're not interested in your HRV, nor am I interested in the score of your HRV in milliseconds, 108 versus 68. What each technology is going to do is try and convert that score into its own proprietary measure of whether I think, Ben, you've spent too little time able to rest and recover over this past 24-hour window. So Ben as a living battery is expending energy doing this podcast, prepping, going for a run later, getting ready to see your friends, going out for a drink. All of these things are energy out. But did you spend any time today in waking hours recouping energy? And when you went to sleep, did you recoup enough energy? And that's what they're going to define as their recovery metric. So this isn't whether I'm getting DOMs after a heavy squat session. This isn't about my ability to recover from an athletic per se, in isolation. This is my human battery exposed, aggregating sleep, rest, and periods in time in calm. So HRV is an odd parameter because as a metric, it doesn't mean anything. It only means something if you go, how often, how many hours did Ben spend chilling out? And for reference sake, I would like in each 24 hours, Ben, for you to have about 35% of that 24 hours in energy restoration mode, parasympathetic tone. So each device has got its own version of that. They all have a proprietary algorithm that gives them a unique software proposition. But the principle here is similar. Am I pushing this system too hard, running the risk of running out of gas? But I don't know if that running out of gas will be in 3 months' time, 2 years' time, 5 years' time. But it probably will express in the first instance as reduced athletic performance, which is why they sold originally into the athletic community who are interested in that as a marker. If I get a Whoop score that says my recovery is 22%, that may impair my ability to do hard training, etc. But that might also make me a slightly more irritable dad, a slightly shitter strategic thinker later in the day. So it's all of these things. They're not just athletic outcomes, they are life outcomes. Mm-hmm. So if I like to track parameters, resting heart rate has great validity from a health marker point of view. We don't forget blood pressure, which is included, interestingly, on the Whoop MG as a rolling metric, because they're both interesting markers of pressure and stress and well-being over time. But HRV is probably goated in the sense that it has this unifying marker of human battery expenditure. And when it's applied to a software that you're consistently calibrated with, as in I've used the same bit of kit and I know when it's telling me I feel brilliant and I know when it's telling me I feel crap, it can have great insights into which behavior is driving good and which behavior is driving bad. Sleep architecture, again, is much more straightforward. But I think I see great merit in them if you start with a question and you calibrate your behavior based on not letting it tell you how you feel, but working out how you feel aligned with what it's telling you.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of people who don't really ask themselves why are they measuring that thing. It's just they're measuring everything. They get stressed by the data because there's so much going on, but they don't really understand it. So thank you for clearing that up. Why is there such a big emphasis as well on V02 Max, and what would be your go-to in terms of people want to better their VO2 max in as simple forms as possible?
Yeah, so VO2 max is the volume of oxygen you could consume in 1 minute going full bore, right? So it's the maximum oxygen you can extract from the air. So if I'm in a confined room and I'm exercising my absolute crackers off and I'm breathing in 100 litres of air and expiring 100 litres of air, but in a minute, 5 litres of oxygen has been removed from that air. And let's imagine I weigh 100 kilograms. This is all very useful for my crap maths. Mm-hmm. But if I've taken 5 litres of air out, through the fact that I used it physically to make energy, and I'm 100 kilograms, then my VO2 max would be 50 millilitres of oxygen was consumed by each kilogram of my body in 1 minute. And that's what this number looks like. So people see the number of VO2 max. It's millilitres of oxygen extracted per kilogram per minute. And that's because the more oxygen I can extract, the more work I can accomplish. So someone with a higher VO2 max is going to likely be a better endurance athlete until we reach the upper echelons of athletic performance, where we've got running economy or cycling economy and efficiency and lactate threshold, all these other things playing into it. But VO2 max is the objective marker of cardiorespiratory fitness. And we say cardiorespiratory fitness, not cardiovascular, because cardiovascular is the word we use for cardiovascular health, whereas this is cardio, heart, respiratory, lungs. It's that fitness. So this is how I'd work out of you and me, Ben, who's got a better endurance engine. Now, why that's got popularized is increasingly it's being shown to be the best single predictor of life expectancy, right? So it went from, right, let's get a triathlete's, VO2 max and work out if he's been lazy in the off season and then slaughter him up the hills, to actually, I need Barbara, who's 65, to have a VO2 max because I don't know if she can survive the anesthetic for the complex operation she's about to have. And what you've got here is we've confused a performance parameter with a physiological parameter of life. This is how much oxygen I can consume. The biggest feature of my VO2 max will be the size of my heart and how much blood it can pump per pump. stroke volume. So this is something that got stolen by the fitness and elite performance community, and the medical community just didn't ever talk about it because they didn't have a drug for it. They don't have a way of testing it. And so you've got GPs running a whole load of tests, blood pressure, glucose, cholesterol, which are less predictive of life expectancy than the one they've forgotten to talk about. They forgot about Dre, would be what I would say. And the reality is,
brilliant.
This is the parameter. Now, the hassle we always had with it is to get it, you had to stick a mask on your face, cycle to exhaustion, or run to exhaustion. Have you done one, Ben?
Mrs. Miggins doing that, isn't? I couldn't imagine it. Yeah.
She can't do it, right? You've done one. I mean, they're brutal, and you go to exhaustion, which in itself, I've run thousands of V02 Max tests, and the reality is very few people get to V02 Max. They stop because they're in discomfort. They didn't stop because their body stopped being able to consume oxygen. So it's a challenging parameter to capture in your general population in particular because of the hardware. Then new and novel ways of capturing it have come out, which is the obvious one is what we call field tests. So we all remember the bleep test from school. So you had to run between two fixed points, and the further you got, the higher your fitness level. That's a V02 Max test. And what we've worked out is people who get to level 13.8, when we tested them in the lab, they had a V02 Max of 45. People who got to level 14.2, tested them in the lab, they had an average V02 Max of 53. So I don't need to do the test if I do an equivalent, if that makes sense. And what people started to do then is find different ways of creating equivalencies and bringing the dynamic nature of a field test to more accessible at-home tests. So there are ways you can measure it by putting a device on your sternum that measures the shock wave of your heart, called seismocardiography, and that could be used in a GP's office, for example. I work with a company called Hero, and that's a downloadable app that you can do a high knees run at home, and that'll give you a clinically validated V02 Max in 2 minutes. Right, so now we're putting V02 Max out of the lab into the consumer. Why? A, its impact on longevity is unequivocal. B, it will give an insight into the efficacy or effectiveness of your training. So what we tend to find with V02 Max, much like most parameters, is most people are overtraining at the high intensity to improve it. If you work with a top performance coach, they might lean towards something like an 80-20. 80% of your work is in the light intensity, 20% in the higher intensities. So we see lots of people doing too much of the high intensity work from a cardio point of view. So your perfect V02 Max, your framework will probably be some zone 2, long and slow. Then the most effective protocol seems to be this thing called the Norwegian protocol, which is your 4-minute maximum exertion. So warm up, 4 minutes as hard as you can do for 4 minutes at a steady state. So it's not I'm making it harder every minute. It's I start off at the pace that I'm going to die at 3 minutes 30 and
that's
cling on.
What I've got tomorrow, which is a beautiful thing. Yeah.
Beautiful thing. And then you got 3 minutes active recovery. And the purpose of that active recovery is so that I can go to the next 4 minutes and deliver my best performance. So I do 4 sets of 4 with sets of 3 minutes recovery in between. And that Norwegian protocol seems to be the most effective to boost it up with zone 2 runs. And then people might want something like their tempo run. So just off their race pace from a running or cycling point of view. And that fusion mixed with appropriate, strength training and particularly conditioning, flexibility work would move it up. But the biggest single thing, Ben, would be its milliliters per kilogram. So if I take you as a 100 kilogram male and you've got a V02 Max of 5 liters, so you had 50 milliliters per kilogram. If I reduce your weight to 90 kilograms and keep the same heart size, lung size, then I've increased your V02 Max by at least 10%. So the same engine on a smaller chassis works well. And this is why it's going to be very difficult for someone weighing 95 kilograms to outperform someone who weighs 65 kilograms across a 26.2 mile distance. And your big units who are trying to chase down sub-3 marathons are phenomenal athletes, but they can't be the 242s and the 235s unless they're prepared to sacrifice 20 kilograms of muscle tissue in most instances. Yeah. And there's an outlier to every rule.
Yeah, I guess that's reality. That's probably my friend Hunter McIntyre in Hyrox. I don't know if you've ever seen him. He's just such
I've seen him.
A big unit, but he's probably one of the fastest runners in the field as well, which is just such an odd thing. Especially when you see him train in real life, it's so odd to see. And even with that, I mean, I've got a bike race in 3 weeks. I'm not probably going to increase my performance too much, but I'm just dropping weight at the moment just so that that'll be the main difference for me in terms of shaving a bit of time off. And also when it comes to hills on the bike, I've never understood how much of a difference weight made until I went cycling with this female Ironman athlete, and she was just like flying past me on every single hill because she weighed under 60 kilograms, and it was demoralizing as hell. Yeah.
It's totally wild. And of course, I always loved it when people were like, I've got the new bike, it's 18 grams less. I'm like, you are like 7 kilograms overweight. Why are you spending $4,000 on saving 18 grams on your bike? Have you lost your mind?
Shaving the legs, get rid of the hair.
Shaving the legs. Yeah. I'm like, just carrying a bit of extra timber there, my friend. So, everything comes down to, and of course, then it's power per watt, kilograms per watt. So then you're looking at what's my ability to sustain power with a reduced body weight. And that's where, when you get into the wattage output of elite Tour de France cyclists, it sort of boggles your mind what they can produce over time. And again, that's when I have a different reverence for, I have reverence for great elite athletes in all fields, because they've taken a biological capability to a level that seems unimaginable. And that their watts per kilogram over time is a disgrace.
Yeah, when you look at like people like Pogacar, is it like is zone 2 and the watts that he puts out in zone 2 or how long he holds it for it makes me feel sick.
It's unbelievable. And of course, what you get with this group is this efficiency. So what their zone 2 is a completely different zone 2 to what we would have, in terms of they are still metabolizing fat at a much higher work rate and heart rate. So that the deeper you can go into your maximum heart rate while you're still using fat as your primary fuel, the better an athlete you're going to be. So that's where V02 Max is interesting, as in you and I might, you might have a 10% higher V02 Max than me. I might be 50, you might be 55, but the real question on who's going to do well on the bike ride is who's able to utilize fat as their primary fuel at endurance, at race pace, because the other person is going to use more carbohydrate, fatigue more quickly, and elicit more of the byproduct of energy expenditure. So the real logic of interval training and zone 2 training is increasing our ability to oxidize fat as our primary fuel. And if I can do high intensity work while using fat, then then I'm that person who's doing unimaginable tasks for hours on end, compared to the person who says I can only sustain that for 3 minutes. One's running on glucose and glycogen, one's running on fat. The heart rate may be the same, but the fuel's very different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but before I'll let you go, Mr. Patrick, because I know it's your birthday. A lot of people who listen to this podcast on Pogacar or those level of athletes, but I believe a lot of them are already training. They're already pushing the limits in terms of what they're capable of currently, and even some of them may have or lean into an unhealthy relationship with training, even in terms of pushing the limits. In terms of training, what type of training do you see as maybe the most powerful in terms of being a stress regulator? Is it lifting, cardio, running, just as simple as walking? What would you advise, or does it again all come down to it depends?
Everything is it depends, which is a good place to start. But I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be that guy. I'm not going to say it. I think from a decalibration point of view, it's lower intensity work. I think low intensity cardio, zone 1, zone 2 in nature is with a friend is pretty much the potent pill for modern day stress management. If you were to go out for a light bike ride, in the hills, side by side with a friend, where you're sort of talking, sharing, joking, you're getting what we call biophilic, impact. So the role of nature, connection with nature, and you're getting the zone 2 cardio,
and the coffee and the chocolate croissants, and
yes, yeah. Truly, and it's like, I think we need exercise to be a release valve, not a constant, winding of the springs. And it's the same thing, right? I can go on that bike and I can do a hill interval session, or I can do a FTP ride, whatever it is. It's the same bike in the same gear. It looks similar, but it's very different. And joyful movement. Not saying we've got to go to primal movement patterns and be crawling around with barefoot shoes on. There's a place for everything. But I think using exercise as a tool to recalibrate, to reconnect, is a really sometimes forgotten tool. I think from what I see with you, you're good with that. But I think we can't ignore our natural innate connection with humans and nature, and remembering exercise can de-stress us as well as re-stress us. Depends on the intensity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is why I worry, I guess, sometimes about and I mean, I've been in the thick of it, the social media athlete, and that's because I think there's a real notion and culture of people pushing further and further and further. Where's the next golden carrot? Then there's this reinforcement of validation and likes that people are getting, and then some of the other likes that they get on certain posts aren't as big as if they're doing these big feats and they're chasing the next bigger thing and the next bigger thing. And then the thing that the social media athlete doesn't have, that, and that, you know, the traditional athlete has, is that off period, that off season, that deload, because it's go all the time. So I think this is a really interesting but also dangerous space that we're kind of now, again, with social media, only just seeing come to fruition with injuries and breakdowns and these kinds of things. I think it's something we'll probably see more of over the next couple of years as well.
I think that's a really astute observation, pal. And I think it's, you say, we all need an off season, you know, and of course the grind gets the clicks, but the kind gets the years and the life, you know. And I, you know, I get ribbed by my mates because I love my recovery stuff, and they're like, "What are you recovering from, you lazy bastard?" You know, and I'm like, I'm recovering from life, right? You know, I'm sauning and cold plunging and hyperbaric chambering and walking in nature, because I'm not doing high intensity exercise at volume, but everything goes in the same pot. And so leaning into, you know, self-care, kindness, you know, low and slow in the presence of others in nature, it should be mandatory for anyone who wants to perform in whatever definition of performance they're giving themselves. Yeah. So I'm recovering from life, and everyone else should too.
No, I agree, mate. And I always say to people, and I think it was someone who told me this a while ago, is that you can only train as well as you can recover, and you can only compete as well as you can train. So it all starts at that foundational level. But again, mate, thank you so much. I mean, I could speak to you all day about this type of thing. It really kind of it gets my brain firing. So I appreciate you spending a large chunk of your birthday talking to me on the other side of the world, and hopefully the audience takes a great deal away from this. But where can people find more of you and the things that you're doing and the things that you're helping people and supporting people with as well?
It's been a great pleasure, pal. A lovely way to start my birthday morning over here. So I've become, ever since I went on your podcast originally, I've become a podcast machine. So I've got 2 podcasts. I've got the Energy Equation by the High Performance podcast, where I measure the physiology of celebrities and encounter how they manage their sleep, their V02 Max, their exercise. So that's on all streaming platforms. I also have leading global experts in medicine, psychiatry and whatnot on there. So that's great fun. And then I've got a modern wellness podcast with Adrienne and Sammy, and we discuss 2 topics from the world of global wellness every week, from wearable technology to whether we should freeze ourselves when we die, and try and keep a newsletter to the wellness community of what's junk, what's valid, and what we think about stuff. And I've got, if you want to upskill into technical skills, then you go to www.futurepractice.org, and there's a range of courses there that coach you on being able to give others advice on sleep, stress, wearable integration, that sort of thing. So that's my love letter to the fitness industry, to say, if you want to be more of a wellness practitioner, here are some very clear roadmaps and skills that you can take forward.
Cool. I'll put those links in the description for wherever people are listening or watching the podcast as well, so they've got easy access to those. Because I remember you had to give me access to one of the courses, I think after we did the podcast 2 years ago, and there was a great level of insight and knowledge within those. So I'm a big advocate of all the work that you do and all the help that you give to free for people as well. And again, giving that today on your birthday is just another gift from yourself, and you just keep on giving, dude. So I massively appreciate it. And everyone who's listening, please continue to check out Ollie's stuff. Tag us in any story uploads if you're listening to this, whether you're on your weekly walk or your weekly run or whatever you are doing. Continue to share it with people, because if you've gained something from it, then someone else will too. And from myself and Mr. Patrick, we wish you a good week, and goodbye.